Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our regular podcast, Knowledge Empowers. As always, it's me, Kat, with you. Annyeonghaseyo. Then we have Baruch.
Hello.
Then we have Kolaj.
Dobré ráno, good morning, everyone.
And we have a special guest today with us, Mr. David Hecl. Hello.
Good morning, everyone.
And why is Mr. David a special guest? Because it's a different kind of a corporation world. I don't even know if I can call it a corporation precisely, because David is a captain, he's a pilot. And I now need to use my superpowers that I have. And David flew the biggest plane called Airbus A380, where 655 people were in, which I can't even imagine. So total different thing. David, could you just sort of briefly introduce yourself?
So once again, good morning. Yes, as you've said, I've been a captain for the biggest passenger aircraft in this world, to be precise, since 2015. However, I flew that aircraft first time in 2011. So it's been like 11 years almost this year on this great machine. However, it was kind of a last step in my career. Actually, speaking with you guys, Slovak, went to school in Slovakia, today's University of Žilina. At the time, it was a different name. However, still the same facility. And afterwards, I went through a small company in Brno, which is still in the business, flying school, then Czech Airlines, Emirates, Korean. And when COVID hit, I came back home from the big world. And last, I cannot count exactly, but 2.5 years roughly, I've been back here teaching flying from Prague, which I really enjoy a lot.
That was actually my coming up question, and it's a very, very silly question. We, the typical corporation, can have home office, right? Like me and Baruch are now in home. Can pilot have a home office? What a pilot does on home office?
Not really.
So what did you do? Because you couldn't fly, right? There were no flights available.
Yeah, well, but if you look upstairs and you see aircraft flying, you mean you've got at least two highly experienced guys sitting in the cockpit, and it doesn't happen just like overnight. It doesn't happen out of a blue, and especially the guy sitting in the left seat, called captain, first officer in the right seat, they have to have a kind of experience, you know, and quite often these days I'm getting a question: how long did it take you to get into the 380 cockpit? And I can see, you know, when the young guys asking me the question, they are expecting like 2 or 3 years. And then answer 20 years, actually are always ruin their days, okay? So, this is all about you cannot have a you know, specialist, let's say in a medicine, in lawyers on the very high level with just few months or years experience and working. And I would say especially Emirates, it's a huge corporation. When I was leaving the company actually 4 years ago and few days, the company had more than 100,000 employees around the world, okay? And so you really feel the size and magnitude of a company. So just flying the airliners, it's the kind of a cherry on the cake in the aviation, but the people had to go there somehow. And it's if you start from the scratch and you start attending a flying school and you start from a small aircraft like Cessna 172 or in the Czechoslovakia Zlín's family and stuff like that. So it was actually what I was doing when I came back from my last 380 stop, which was in Seoul, flying for Korean, and I went back. Actually, I jumped from the top to the ground, and I started teaching again, youngsters flying this Cessna's 172, and perhaps one day one of these students will follow my footprints, which I've left around the world. And last year or something, joined the corporate business aviation, which was the last piece of aviation I haven't been aware of how does it work actually, and it's quite fun. It's very, very different compared to when you fly for Emirates, as I've said, 100,000+ employees, and now we've got a one aircraft and company with 7 employees. So it's a huge difference, and and it's not just about the company. Obviously, it's about the passengers, because everybody knows that since 9/11. The cockpit and the passenger cabin are 2 different environments in one hull, which is very unfortunate, especially for pilots who would like to somehow socialize with passengers, which is not possible these days, obviously. Got a bulletproof locked door there, but in this corporate aviation, you actually meet the passengers, you speak to them face to face, you greet them, and then you say hi, you say goodbye after the flight. And I've been doing that since actually I've been flying that since last June, and I've got a very long list, very interesting persons from around the world, Hollywood stars and sport legends and successful businessmen, and I have to say all of them are very, very nice people, which I had on board, obviously, as well with Korean and Emirates. But because of that special door behind the cockpit and in front of the passenger cabin, I perhaps knew from the passenger list we've got someone like these people on board, but I didn't have a chance to speak to them like I have now, and it's just amazing.
If we go to that huge Airbus and you had 655 passengers, what is your responsibility there as a captain towards the passengers? Can you take us through?
Yeah, just a little bit clarify the 655. I'm very glad that you read my book, okay? And and 655, it's a magic number, but on that particular flight, and it was a nice flight from Dubai to Prague. Actually, the aircraft I've flown on that day has 615 seats. It means it can carry 615 passengers. But you have to realize we've got a 24 cabin crew on board, sometimes 26. Especially on that flight, it was 26 when you've got 2 guys sitting in the cockpit, and when you've got kids under the age of 2, which don't require to have a seat, but they still count into the number of total persons or souls on board. So at the end of the day, if you take the passengers, if you take the crew, cockpit, cabin, and if you take these minors, when you come to the magic number 655 souls on board, which I had on that particular flight. Obviously, captain is the one who, as I've said before, is hopefully the most experienced regarding the aviation on board. However, on every flight, you've got people usually say captain, but you might have 2 captains on board, and one has to be assigned as a commander of a flight. And a commander is actually responsible for everything what happens on board, and he's responsible for passengers at the same time as well. He's responsible for the safety in the first place. So whatever goes wrong on the flight, there is only one accountable person, and it's a captain. So if you put this together, from one side, the accountability towards the law, obviously, if you've got 655 souls on board, and you've got an asset worth of 10 billion crowns, then you must be really careful not to make any mistake. And it comes from the other side, the experience you must to have, or skills, knowledge, etc., to be able to act as a commander on a flight like that, in a corporation like that, because there is no space, for mistake.
How do you handle such pressure? Did your palms sweat, or was it special situation for you?
have a look. I've already kind of answered the question before when I said how long did it take me to get to the cockpit of the aircraft like that, and it's 20 years. Okay, from let's say when I started my commercial flying, and I always say, have a look. On the first day, I was like a small, tiny snowflake. Okay. And today I feel like a nicely grown and matured snowman. And this is how does it work? First day after you get your pilot license, you think, wow, this is what I got, and now I'm the best in the world. No, it's like a medical doctor. When he leaves the university, he's got the diploma in his hand, but that's it. Okay. And then he has to go through I don't know how many years because before he can first time cut by himself the appendix for itself. Okay. And this is the same with pilots, and especially in my case, roughly 20 years to get to the cockpit of a freighter and become captain on this amazing aircraft. And this is a time you have to work on yourself, and you have to really acquire and accommodate all this, what is happening around you, because on every flight is different. Every flight, you can learn on every flight something. And it just depends on your personality if you want to improve yourself, and whatever. From tiny until perhaps I don't want to call that emergency, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to write a book, but I would be on a National Geographic, okay? But something which is not normal procedure on a flight. And if you work on that, and after every flight, you kind of look back what happened, you go into the manuals, you make it a little bit more clear for yourself. So if it happens next time, you are a little bit more prepared, and you move yourself slowly but surely ahead. And after 20 years, you feel really confident to handle 655 passengers, flying them home, which itself, it's a little bit adrenaline in your blood, to be honest. But this is how it works. And I guess the big corporation it is, like Emirates, they are more aware of that, because it's not only pilots but salesmen and I don't know, business developer, etc., etc. So they hire people who are able to move that direction. Because if you say, have a look, Dave, this is my asset for 10 billion crowns and 655 passengers that take it 5,000 kilometers away from here, you must be really confident as a company that the person is capable of doing so.
Was it always your dream to, fly 655 people or fly 80? Or why did you go into flying airplanes? Why did you want to become pilot in the first place?
I joined the university, guys, many years before you were even born. So that time, nobody knew about anything like 380. Okay, it was 1989 when I joined the university. So if you remember,
I was born, they weren't.
And that time, nobody knew about this. Obviously, the time was 747. It was, like everybody's dream to fly 747. And at my high school, I went to gymnasium in Kiev. Obviously, at fourth grade, I had to decide where to go, which university to study afterwards. And at the time, I was a little bit unsure about my future. I perhaps wanted to be a medical doctor, but I always passed away when I had to eat blood, so it didn't work for me. And so one day my father came home, and he had like a booklet, the size like of that book, and opened somewhere in the middle, and it was a list of universities and what you can study the next year. And I don't think so it was by a chance, it was definitely on purpose, opened on the University of Žilina, the pilot's study. And I read through, and I said, well, yes, I can fly the Chmelak Zlin 37, and it's lovely. I don't have to wake up every morning. So I said yes, and I was fortunate enough to get there, because that time it was kind of like, on high demand, let's put it this way. And still I wasn't kind of like super confident about my future. But later on, it was perhaps October, November, first grade. So it was fall 1889. Were dramatic times in the former Czechoslovakia. And I remember walking into the hangar at the airport. It was like a cloudy day, a rainy day, a drizzle day, cold day, and so nothing nice outside. But when we walked inside, suddenly, and I saw like 25 the training aircraft we had there at the time. It was that moment. I said, yes, I will have to make it, and I'm kind of like a person, who likes challenges, and challenges been moving me forward all the time, and I guess the opportunity and privilege I had to fly 380 and for the two world companies or lines like Emirates and Korean at the same time, not at the same time, but one by one, and it gave me the opportunity to fly the beautiful 380 around the world, but both directions. It's something like when I decided to join that university in 1989, I had no idea about anything like that, Obviously, no one could dream of that time, but I'm very happy it actually happened. But it took me how many years? 32 years afterwards. We are speaking here today, and if I look back, I have to agree, and I have to say yes. It's been, and I guess I've got still some years to come. It's been always very hard work, because nothing and no one will give you anything for free, especially if you want to work in the corporations like we've been talking about today.
And I have a follow-up question, and let's start with Emirates. And you've said they had more than 100,000 employees. Do they, besides of you have to continue studying all the pilot stuff, things are evolving, planes are evolving, did you also receive any kind of an education on, for example, company culture or diversity? Because you have people working for Emirates from all around the world with different cultures, different backgrounds, and you need to be able to speak even with your crew. Did you receive any specific education on that part?
Yes, of course. And you have to realize in the cockpit, that time when I was with Emirates, we had 86 nationalities in the cockpit and 125 nationalities in the cabin.
Wow.
So on a flight, when you have 30 crew members, you might have 30 different nationalities, 30 different mother tongues, education backgrounds, religion, etc., etc. So when I joined Emirates, I have to say I didn't realize that as much. I knew it was a multicultural airline, but once you've joined that company and you sit in the classroom, and the first 3 days was just about the company culture.
Wow.
And it was just, I would say, from today's point of view, if I look back, it was just a brief introduction of what's gonna to happen in the future. And you really have to pay attention to all what was said during the first 3 days. It was just kind of a bullet points. And then you have to elaborate on that and extend them during your daily operation, because perhaps, and I always use this as a great example, jokes, okay?
Mm.
Good thing for myself is I can't speak jokes, okay? So I didn't get in this trouble, but the joke I can say to you guys, and you will be laughing even tomorrow, I can't say to someone else, perhaps from different part of the world. It might be offensive for them. So one must be really, really careful with stuff like that. So the conversation, perhaps just in the cockpit, because you've got two guys sitting in the cockpit. It can be not only two guys like two men, but it might be girl as well, women, which I've had few women in a cockpit with Emirates, and it's a kind of a practice. If you want to make a first impression, it takes you 30 seconds to ruin it, but it takes you 7 hours to establish that. And when you have a flight which lasts for 5 hours, you don't have enough time, to recover from a first failed impression. Okay. So I would say it was the same. They put same stress on this corporate culture, which was great from me. and it was amazing experience and school for me, because living here in the Czechoslovakia, beautiful countries, both of them, but we've never had this exposure to foreigners from around the world, at least not as I had with Emirates, and I will be always grateful for this experience in my life, because even today I can feel myself how I different react when I fly around Europe, or even here in the country I meet foreigners. Before I was a little bit kind of a shy and scared to speak to these people, but today, I know I can't meet. Perhaps if I met someone from a different planet, it would be a new experience. But after spending in total 11 years working outside Emirates, Korean, I guess this put me in a nice and relaxed mood talking to foreigners. And as I said, first 3 days introduction, but really then on daily basis, once had to learn himself on the interaction with different people in a cockpit, different people in a cabin, obviously sometimes with passengers, ground staff, etc.
This is why we are asking, is because we keep talking about this diversity a lot in our podcast. And so far I worked in both companies where we had maximum of 46 nationalities. So you just beat us. But exactly just because of being exposed to this, it just moved us way forward as human beings and way more open-minded. And with that, let me ask, did you ever experience a situation that you were shocked and that it took you like, okay, how am I going to behave, or what am I going to do?
Look, from my working experience, I have to say one thing at the same time. Company, especially the company like Emirates, it's very selective company. And they might have hundreds and thousands of applications for just a few dozens of pilots positions available. And which is a huge advantage, and it's kind of a mandatory for corporation like that, because the company, when I was leaving, I believe we are getting to the number closest again. It's 4,500 roughly pilots and 25,000 cabin crew. Okay. And you have to have really very well set up and developed selection process. So you are very sure once you've signed a contract with a new employee, the employee fit into the system, because you don't have time in this, amount of people working together and the numbers of flights dispatched daily to deal with some miscommunication. And as you ask about the culture education, the big topic for aviation business is called CRM, crew resource management. Nobody likes that topic. It's a mandatory topic. It's an initial training and a recurrent training on yearly basis, annual basis, and everyone has to go through if you want or not. And it's not just because of the regulatory requirements. Obviously, it was set up by regulatory requirements based on some bad experience in the past, which is kind of an aviation industry standard. If something goes wrong, someone looks at that, and if there is something to learn from, here we go. And the CRM is one of the biggest topics in the aviation. I remember aviation before and after CRM, or with CRM, and I have to say that the CRM saved a lot of lives. And it's great thing, as I've said, and everybody would agree. Nobody likes that, sitting in the classroom for the entire day, besides having great coffee. but I found it quite often very interesting, especially like with Emirates. It was very interactive. It wasn't just sitting and listening to presentations. It was pilots and cabin crew all together sitting in the classroom, because this is the environment how you work in the aircraft. And it's not just to talk to the guy sitting next to you, but you have to still talk to 24, 26. How many of them are behind you from very different parts of the world? So the communication is very important, and it's part of the selection process. So that obviously I cannot say that I haven't had any misunderstandings or any issues regarding the communication within my 26 years of a professional career. But looking back to the Emirates era, I would say it was almost nothing because of that selection process, because of that requirements for new joiners and their abilities to fit in that system, being able to work as one team in this kind of environment without any issues. Because, as I said, the company doesn't have tools, doesn't have energy, time to deal with that. So this is kind of if you are a corporation like this one, you've got the opportunity or privilege to pick people you want, so you don't have to beg someone to come over.
And compare the Emirates with Korean. Is it a huge difference, or was it similar?
It is very different. Okay.
Can you take us through how Korean works from the company culture?
Well, you have to realize one thing. You mentioned perhaps Arabic and Korean. Yes, obviously Emirates is based in Dubai, so it might take you in that it's an Arabic company. However, it's been established by Brits. It's English speaking company. Okay, put it this way. And even Tim Clark, still the only one president of the Emirates airline, he's British, English. And a lot of people in the top management and medium management are from Britain, and you can feel that. You feel like being in a Western airline, and I guess it's great. Obviously, it's got all these from around the world, including the Arabic feelings. Obviously, because it's based there. But I would say working wise, it's really westernized, very nicely westernized company with all these procedures, policies. If you go to Germany, France, UK, oh, that's it. I know that from somewhere. So I really enjoyed that. I loved that. However, Korean is very typical culture company. It's been established after World War II with different names. It's been kind of like a different entities officially, but it's still the same Korean, whatever it is, but Korean Air these days, the name. And it's opposite the Emirates. I could have mentioned that Emirates, had 96% of employees were expats, actually, only 4% of locals. And Korean, it was quite opposite. It was 90% locals and just tiny bit of expats. So actually for us, for expats, it was to follow, I don't want to say blindly, but who worked with Asian cultures knows that they are kind of like very oriented on what they achieved, and one has to be aware of that and has to prove that is able to cope with that Asian / in my case Korean system, which I didn't have any issues because the Emirates prepared me very well for multicultural environment, and even though it was very kind of like unique culture environment, it was still a different environment compared to where I was born and grew up. So, but it wasn't run by expats, it was run by locals. It wasn't westernized company, it was really Asian company, and it is still. So you can't compare these two airlines. It was really huge, and as your friend said, we can speak about that for another 10 podcasts.
Culture differences. Now I'm a huge fan of Korea right now as I'm learning the language, I'm watching the series, I have my lecture, etc. So it's just interesting that if you have a company with majority of just one group and you have the minority, they do have to assimilate to the group. So that's why we stay in corporation, because we like the variance, and if it's nice balance, it just moves us forward, versus if you have just a bigger part of one group versus the other. I do want to ask a few, like a type of a different questions. But you also mentioned in the book, for example, that in case of a terrorist attack, that you as the captain need to remember all of your crew members as an example, right? We don't want to sound racist or anything, but there might be some for us especially, and like you've said, if we go back to Czechoslovakia, that was the unfortunate case. We are only white people here, right? So that's what we are used to. Was it very difficult for you to like remember the stuff?
You mean my crew members?
Crew members, yep.
It was very difficult, and I elaborate on that. But a little bit back to the previous question. Don't take me wrong. I love Korea. Okay, I love people. I love a company as well. I loved flying for them, and it was just another amazing experience. Because I had a good feeling that these pilots, my chief pilot, was a great man, and they organized dinners for us, for expats, and we always had a good time. It was just the culture is very different compared to Western companies, and I guess everyone who worked in any Asian country like Korea, Japan, China, can confirm that it's really different. And now back to this to the question. You have to realize that per policy or per procedure, we had actually 3 minutes time together, pilots and cabin crew before a flight, to introduce ourselves, to say some words about the flight, and try to remember 26 faces within 3 minutes when you have to speak.
Not possible.
And when you've got these people on board for the rest of your flight, and sometimes, we flew perhaps to Los Angeles, spent 48 hours there, flew back, and after 4 days, you see someone in the airport is saying hi, and you think, did I fly with her or with him? Oh, yes. So it was a little bit, it was obviously, it's challenging to remember, but again, Emirates, again, great, procedure, great policy regarding that the cabin crew were more than welcome to come over to the cockpit. And some of them actually had to come to the cockpit to serve us beverages, food, etc. And they encouraged everyone to come over to the cockpit just because of this, because really 3 minutes is not enough to remember 26 faces. And when you are in China, in Korea, and you see 10 people, you think they are all the same. Actually, they think about us exactly the same, which I couldn't understand. Yeah, so different. I said, no, you are all the same as well. so we had this great communication. So for me, it was impossible to remember, to be able to remember within 3 minutes all my crew. So it was the kind of a tool we used to invite everyone, whenever, guys, you've got time, come over, let's chat for a bit, and at least, you can better understand and better remember who is part of your crew for the case when you have to say yes, no, yes, no.
How does a training for a terrorist attack look like? Like, we don't have that, right? Because we just work. But you guys really, when we watch any movies, right? Or now there are this series of whatever crashes there were and what went through, etc. So obviously this happening, how does a training for that looks like?
What I like on aviation is, and I've mentioned that already, whatever happens, whatever goes wrong, you've got committees and regulators and aviation authorities. They look at that. It might take years, but still they work on that, and they actually find out what went wrong, how to change the policies and procedures from stopping that to happen again, etc. And this is kind of like, which I always like to get a new information and to learn again something new. And regarding the terrorist attack, you can divide it into two topics. First, security, and second, the CRM. it looks like that CRM is about the communication, especially with terrorists. It's about the communication, okay, and it's about the recognition and the communication afterwards. If you have to, obviously, it's not encouraged these days anymore, especially until 9/11. So actually, it shouldn't happen these days because you've got really the metal bulletproof doors in between the cabin and the cockpit, so no one would be able to get in that cockpit, but wouldn't be able. It's not gonna to happen, okay? So if you divide it in these two, and yes, actually we watched during this CRM and security trainings, we watched different stories regarding hijacks, and we somehow had a group discussion on that, facilitated with someone who really perhaps studied security, CRM, so we're experts in that. And I have to say, Emirates had even this facilitated us on that topics with university degrees, which was really amazing, because when you got a really value from that training, and you feel you learned something on that day. Even for us, said nobody liked that day, but really, if it was perhaps something like that, I really enjoyed that. So when you've got hours and hours discussions on that, and obviously you cannot prepare yourself like you can prepare for engine failure in a simulator, but you don't have a simulator for hijack, okay? And it's really about kind of like a mental understanding who these people are, what they are trying to achieve, if they are serious or not, if it's just a threat, or if they really want to get something from that. And to discuss that, to share opinion, how you would deal with it. Still, the company provides tools, but it's generic, obviously. It cannot describe every single case which has happened, and perhaps another one that obviously might happen in future. But you should be able to understand what is behind, what are the risks, what are the threats, not to be trapped by them, and be able to deal with that. So it looks perhaps that the captain's job is just to fly the aircraft, but I have to say that to fly the aircraft is one of the last things he has to on the board, because he's got an autopilot, and this is this switch just here in front of him, autopilot on, and that's it. It might be switched on a few seconds after departure, and you might not even be forced to switch it off before landing, because it can land by yourself. But you can hear everything. You have to be, first of all, accountable, responsible on board, and sometimes you have to really deal with. So it's about most of the time about the flight management itself, because the autopilot can do that job for you better than you can do it by your hands. And if you are not occupied by flying the aircraft manually, then you've got obviously more capability and space for the rest when you need it.
Have you ever experienced a situation with maybe human wrong behavior, or not really a hostage, but this kind of a security thing?
Yeah, it happens. Yes, it happens. And these days, I'm not saying unfortunately, but after 9/11 again, it was kind of like really changing, game-changing day in the aviation. And I remember times before 9/11, we can call it open cockpit door open policy. Everyone could come over, had a chat. Everybody was interested in what is happening in the cockpit. Whoa, first impression was, whoa, it's so small here. I said, yes, because we are paid for being here, so we don't deserve any space, okay? After the 9/11, everything completely has changed. So, well, unfortunately, I didn't have anything before and afterwards as well regarding really safety or security of a flight. But obviously, when you've got hundreds of passengers on board, I guarantee you, okay, every time something happens, and because of that, someone has to fly the aircraft all the time. So as a pilots, we are not even allowed to be involved in what is happening in the cabin physically. obviously, as a captain, you must be informed what is happening in the cockpit, in the cabin, sorry. And because if you have to divert or if you have to organize something, you are the one, as I've mentioned before, you are the responsible, accountable person, only one on board who can decide, have a look, I'm handing over the passenger to police. But you've got a very well-trained cabin crew behind you. You've got a 20, 26 sometimes of them. Half of them can be men, working every day in gym. And on top of that, as a captain, you've got the authority to ask or nominate one of the passengers to help you to deal with perhaps, unruly passengers. And as I said in the book, if you have a Arnold Schwarzenegger on board, say, Arnold, I need you to help. Okay, so.
Okay, I'm gonna ask last question because it was also written in your book, and we will mention the book. I'm also showing it on the YouTube in case you guys want to see it. We will mention it in all our comments. There was a part. What happens if someone dies on the airplane? Can you take us through? Because that was for me shocking. I did share that information with these two, but it was just shocking for me. So can you please share that with us? What's the procedure if someone dies on the plane?
But there are some more funnier, parts in the book.
I like these morbid parts.
Have a look. To be born and to die, it's a part of a life, and none of these, because both happens. Both happen on board. It happens, and I was fortunate. I've been fortunate enough. It wasn't my case. I haven't had a birth on board, and I haven't had a death on board. However, I had some serious medical issues. And obviously, you cannot underestimate if something like this happens. For giving the birth, cabin crew, they got training. Okay, they get training. Obviously, they've got a limited options, so opportunities on board, but still they've got. I'm not gonna say everything they need for that, but stuff they need for giving the birth, perhaps. And you've got always the opportunity to pick up the phone and call, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, or purser speaking. There is a medical doctor on board. Please indicate yourself to our cabin crew. We need you.
Now.
3 minutes ago. And the same for the death. Okay, and if it happens, and if really happens that the person is dead, there is a body on board, and the body is dead, and you've got a full aircraft, so you have to put the body somewhere, and you've got several options. The body has to be in a bag. It cannot be just like that, obviously. If it's lie down on the floor, but cannot be closed all the way, it can be closed after the medical doctor declares the body death, and you might not have a medical doctor on board. However, you've got the tools on board, especially with Emirates, which was amazing, to talk directly to hospital in Houston. Houston, we've got a problem, and it's really so we speak directly to specially trained medical doctors in Houston. If you ask your doctor, if you've got a friend, medical doctor on the phone, have a look, I've got a pain here, and he said, you know what, don't bother me, go and to see a doctor, okay? Because they don't like giving advices on the phone without any investigation, but these medical doctors are specially trained, and they are able to give advice. And actually, if you don't have a medical doctor on board, perhaps regarding the resuscitation, cabin crew can't stop it by themselves. So it might be a physical issue for them. You might have a 24, 26 of them, but still, if you have a resuscitate someone for hours, it takes a lot of energy. So it's a lot of unpleasant stuff with that, but you have to, in a very pleasant way, deal with that, because it's still a human body. You might have relatives on board. You've got obviously passengers around, and fortunately for that, you've got some, again, guardians, policies, procedures, how to deal with that. but it's nothing you would like to do. I'm telling you, especially in the aircraft.
I'm gonna close it with following words. Our life in our corporates, it's like super easy listening to what you guys have to go through and all the training. And it's not just like you said, I'm just the driver of the big plane, but there's so much responsibility, so much training, so much experience needed. And you really need to pick the right people for those right positions that they will be capable to perform those jobs, and they are not easy. So for that, I'm just like really, if I would have a head, I would just put it down like, wow. Thank you very much for sharing all of your stories with us, and I hope our listeners will appreciate it as well. Please write us a comment, subscribe, give us a like, comment, because this was a view on a different type of a corporation, and we see the huge difference between ours and yours. So with that, I'm gonna say 수고하셨습니다.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Virginia, choke.
Can say a few words. Thank you for inviting me. And if someone is, keen on reading a little bit more about it, or perhaps even listening, there are on a YouTube, there are several podcasts, which was a pleasure to attend. And it's hours and hours speaking about the aviation, and obviously the book, nicely written by Czech writer Martin Moravec, gives you answers to 480 questions he asked me. And it took us more than 30 hours to speak compared to the 50 minutes today. So I guarantee there are plenty more information. Unfortunately for our English-speaking listeners, it's only perhaps for Czech and Slovak readers, but perhaps, who knows, one day it might be in English as well.
That's an opportunity. That's a great opportunity to put it in English. Thank you very much. We are very pleased having you in our podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a good day.
This podcast represents our own opinions, experience, and our own ideas. We do not represent any official statement from our employers, and this is not their official channel representing the company.